Is that
Women are not politically
optimistic view?
interested,
Do
you
you
know.
think
The sense
about
of
that?
like when
Let's talk!
Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk. We have with us today Siew Kum Hong, who is no stranger to the political scene in Singapore. He was a nominated Member of Parliament from 2007 to 2009, and today he serves as Vice-President of Maruah, a Singaporean human rights NGO. Trained as a lawyer, Mr. Siew created a stir when he became involved in the Aware saga, when the old guard and newer members of the organization were engaged in a leadership tussle. Mr. Siew was also an active NMP, often making insightful interventions and asking pointed questions in Parliament. In 2007, he became only the second parliamentarian to bring a petition to the House that led to a robust debate on Section 377A of the Penal Code. Welcome, Kum Hong. Thank you for joining us on Let's Talk. Let me start by bringing you back a couple of years to the Aware saga. Why did you come out so strongly in support of the old guard, as they were referred to? In fact, you were regarded by some of their members as their legal advisor. What motivated you to jump into the fray, and do you think you made a difference?
Well, the short answer is they asked me for help, and when they asked me for help, I knew some of the old members, and I was actually all along an associate member of Aware. As a man, I couldn't be a full member, but I was an associate member because I agreed with the values and the objectives of Aware, which is, to fight for women's rights, to fight for, more equal treatment of women, to fight against discrimination and all that good stuff, right? And I believed in it. And, when this group came in with all the hidden agendas and what seemed to me to be a very regressive and conservative approach to women's rights, I felt like, it was only the right thing to help them, in their fight to reclaim Aware and bring it back to its original objectives.
You're Vice President at Maruah. Not many people know about this organization. What exactly do you do, and why was Maruah started in the first place?
Well, Maruah is a human rights NGO. There is such a thing in Singapore. We are primarily an advocacy group, so we see our mission as being to advocate for human rights in Singapore. When we started out, we were working more on the, we started in 2007, and at that time, there was a discussion at the ASEAN level on the what's turned out to be the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission for Human Rights. And we wanted to feed into that process and kind of represent Singapore's civil society, right? To present the views of Singapore's civil society to the Singapore government, right? To try and play a role in the creation of this very important commission. The commission has been established, and actually right now we are working on the ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, right? Again, trying to bring forward the voice of Singapore civil society on what that declaration should look like. So, a big part of this is advocacy work, and we want to bring about change in Singapore. We want to see more policies and more laws that are respectful and protective of human rights. And historically, human rights is kind of given short shrift in Singapore, right? So we want to do that. We want to change that situation, but it is a very long and challenging process.
We keep hearing about the materialistic Singaporean, one that doesn't care about human rights. Is this true? Do you think Singaporeans are interested in what you say and do at Maruah?
I would actually, look at it differently. I think Singaporeans don't understand, what human rights can mean to them, how human rights can be very important to them. And because they don't understand that, that's why on the surface, they don't care about it. But I think, whenever Singaporeans encounter a situation where they understand that, hey, actually this is kind of an issue of human rights and, my human rights are being infringed, that's when they can really mobilize and come together. So I think a really good example was actually the Aware saga, right? When that happened, I think people felt like, in a way, they felt like they had a stake in this because it felt like, civil society was having its freedom of expression kind of curtailed, right? And so they, liberal Singaporeans came forward. Another example would be the Internal Security Act. In 1987, the government detained 22 people under the ISA for a so-called Marxist conspiracy. Now, I think that, and we came together to commemorate the 25th anniversary earlier this year, together with Function 8. And I think the people who were affected, meaning the detainees, the people immediately around them, people who knew them, and in fact activists at that time, civil society activists at that time in 1987, they all understand how important human rights was, because immediately there was this climate of fear in Singapore, and people couldn't feel like they could express themselves freely, they couldn't associate freely, they couldn't advocate for things that were important to them. And these people who've had their human rights curtailed understand very clearly why human rights are important.
How can we move the needle to advance the democratic agenda by protecting human rights in Singapore?
I think there are a couple of things that we can do and we should do to increase awareness of human rights in Singapore. First thing, very simply, is human rights education. This is something that Maruah does do, we try to do, and this is all about explaining to people what their rights are, how their rights are important to them, and how their rights can improve their lives. And so it's a long, ongoing process. I kind of wish that Maruah was better funded so that we can do a better job at it. But it is what it is, and we try to do what we can. So when, let's say, whenever there's an occasion, for example, recently there was the International Day against discrimination against homosexuals, and Maruah issued a press statement, just kind of commemorate the occasion. We didn't have an event or anything like that, but we issued a statement, and Yahoo Singapore News actually picked up on that statement and ran a story on that. So these are the kind of the things that people read about it and then they understand a little bit more. I think we've got to do a better job of connecting the dots, right, to show people how their human rights can make a real difference to their day-to-day life. Second thing, second set of things we can do is really advocacy actions, right? And that can be something like Pink Dot. I think Pink Dot, the way they position it, the freedom to love, right? It was a very safe and non-threatening way of pushing through this idea of the right to equality, the right against discrimination under the law. And so that kind of advocacy action can make people stop, take stock, think about their lives, and say, actually this makes sense, and this is how it impacts my life, right? But it's a long process, right? This is not something that's kind of addressed in schools. I don't even know if it's encouraged in schools. It would be really helpful to us, if this kind of material is worked into the official school curriculum, right? But in the absence of that, it's a long road, and we just have to keep working at it. It takes a lot of patience because you don't see overnight payoffs. But I have seen examples where the payoff has been there, where it's made a difference to people's lives, and so we have to continue.
You were an MP. The Singapore Democratic Party, however, believes that members of Parliament should be elected rather than appointed. What are your thoughts?
I think members of Parliament should be elected rather than appointed as well. At the same time, when I became an MP, I felt that there was a pragmatic need for more independent voices in Parliament, right? At that time, we had two elected opposition MPs, and at the time when the NMP scheme was mooted, right, we had one or two elected opposition members as well, I believe two, and so it just seemed important to have more independent voices. And so I decided to be part of the scheme, and I was appointed as an NMP, and the rest is history. So I think there was a time and place for the NMP scheme, but that has passed, and today there is no place for the NMP scheme in Parliament.
You are trained in the law. Do you see the rule of law being practiced in Singapore? What is the rule of law in the first place? Everybody talks about it, but what exactly is it?
Well, the rule of law is a concept where the institutions of justice, let's say the Attorney General's chambers and the courts, and the bar, the lawyers in private practice, and they all form part of this process where laws are upheld without fear or favor. And that ultimately, I think, for me, is the essence of the rule of law. I think where we fall short, would be a couple of things, in a couple of areas. The first area is actually the extent of freedom that people have to comment on whether or not there is rule of law. And that's one of the things about justice, right? Not only must justice be done, it must be seen to be done, right? And I do think there's room for improvement here, because I don't feel like there's enough space for people to express and articulate their views about whether or not the instruments of justice or the law have functioned properly or not, right? So that's one potential area for improvement. But the other one is, and the other aspect is really in Parliament. When your ruling government, when your ruling party, is so strongly represented in Parliament, they have 80-something seats in Parliament, and basically, they're able to push through any changes that they want, any changes to the Constitution that they want, and and party discipline is so strong, right? So there's no apparent dissension within the ranks. That creates challenges for the rule of law, especially because in Singapore, our judiciary doesn't have an established history of judicial activism. Right? So what that leads to is a place where the government changes laws, and to a very large extent, our legal tradition has been such that the courts will respect it. And so, if that's the tradition that the Singapore courts will have, and Parliament is so dominated by one party, then you really have a very risky, situation where the ruling party can make all kinds of laws and the courts would respect those laws. I don't know what the courts today, is totally new generation of judges. I don't know their feelings, on this question. I would love to see the courts being more activist in that sense, right? Being more willing to strike down laws that are unconstitutional, that are very problematic, when you look at human rights norms and things like that.
Online code of conduct. What are your thoughts?
Completely unnecessary. Many people, including myself, think that a lot of user behavior on the internet is actually can be better. It's if you go out there on the internet, yes, there's a lot of stuff out there that's unpleasant, that's offensive, that we wish wasn't there. But a lot of us also think that having a so-called code of conduct, is not the right way to address it, and that the kind of push for an online code of conduct is coming from the government, and it just represents another way in which the government is trying to regulate the internet, which is code for censoring the internet, censoring the bloggers, right? And despite what the government says about wanting to make it, grassroots, bottoms up, the truth is, I think it's simply not necessary. What's more important is to educate users, right? But also to kind of give the space for the community to do more of what people will call community moderation, self-moderation. So let's just take some really good examples. When the poly student a few months back posted a racist tweet on Twitter, that was a really good example of community moderation. What the online code of conduct seeks to do is to say, oh, she shouldn't have tweeted that at all. Yeah, we all know that she shouldn't have tweeted that, but if people have these sentiments, then the point is not to say that they should suppress it and keep it within themselves, or keep it offline, or keep it in the kopitiams, right? That's not the answer. The answer is to show them, hey, these thoughts are wrong, these sentiments are wrong, and the community disapproves of it, and you're on your own. Not that you should be penalized or sent to jail or whatever, but it's wrong, right? And that's the education part of it. And in that case, that's how the Twitter community responded. And in fact, the online community responded. Virtually everyone came out and said, this is uncalled for, this is completely off, this is not the right thing to do, right? So it shows that the community can respond and show what the community standards and norms should be. And I think that's what we need to do on the internet. Not codes, not policies, not laws, not regulations, but really, have the community be more willing to come out and say something is not on. Doesn't mean that you're calling for this person to be prosecuted, because I don't think that's the right answer either. But it's just to set the community norms. And I think over time, people understand, right? In Singapore, these are the norms. these things are not approved. We don't approve of these things. We think that everyone of every race should be allowed to take the MRT train together. We don't believe in segregation. And so, that's why I think the code of conduct is not necessary. And the more we talk about it, I feel like it kind of divides people, and it's just a distraction, right? It gets in the way of, encouraging the community to be more assertive about what we feel the norms should be. And I think, these things will play out by themselves very dynamically. But, we end up in a good place because I feel like the government underestimates, how cohesive and how strong the idea of, Singaporean identity can be. In these little incidents, you really understand, hey, there are a lot of Singaporeans who feel like I do, that, these things are not, not kosher, and, but we don't think the person should go to jail or anything, but, we just want to say that's wrong, right? And so that's the core of the Singapore identity. And incidents like this, we see that being expressed. And I want to see much more of that, I don't want to see more negative racist tweets generating that, but I want to see more avenues of expression, of our Singaporean identity, of the norms that we expect, of the community values that we have, So I think that's a much safer, much healthier place to be.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I really appreciate you coming on Let's Talk, and we look forward to seeing more of your work at Maruah and speaking up on human rights in Singapore.
It was a real pleasure. I had fun. I would like to thank the SDP for inviting me to appear on this series.
Until the next time, I'm Nadine Keller. From all of us at yoursdp.org, thanks for watching. See you again soon.